Creativity Podcast. I'm your host, Mari Reesberg. Over the past several years, I've combined my degrees in acting and somatic psychology to share my sustaining creativity techniques with performers. And now I've decided to share it with a bigger audience that includes you. I believe we are all creative, and this podcast is all about that. I'll be interviewing people from all backgrounds, ages, and creativity experiences to share just how creative we all are. Today, I'll be chatting with Lee Baucom, author and coach. Please enjoy Lee Baucom. Welcome to the Sustaining Creativity Podcast. Today, I'm chatting with Lee Baucom, author and coach. Welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited that you're here and that we get to chat about creativity and how that shows up in your life. But why don't we take a couple of minutes and let our listeners know a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so my background, I was trained as a therapist, and then I went from that to coaching, mainly because I was a little discouraged with the results of the therapy world and where I was working anyway with couples. And because of that switch, I decided it was time to say what I did think instead of why I was upset with things. And so I wrote a book, which is always a good way of, dealing with that and saying, this is where I stand. And that book was about how people can work on their relationship. That book went online in 1999, a very different world of the internet back then, with a very ugly website that still worked. And along the way, it actually built a business I didn't see coming. So that book led to other programs that in fact book expanded to the Save the Marriage system, which has been helping people since really then, and another 7 books along the way about how you thrive in life and how you rebuild relationships. What I wish I had realized early on was I was building a business, and it just built itself, and with some bad effects of that. And so I began to be aware of a couple of things for talking to other authors. Sometimes one is they were in the same place where their book had the potential for a business and they hadn't stepped into it. But two is a lot of times people didn't know how to use a book in a business. And so having had those experiences, I've had lots of conversations. And so these days I'm helping other authors figure out what that book is instead of that the book is the end. Many times people think that's the end of the project, and I would just argue that that's the beginning of the project.
I love it. I mean, so many things in your own journey and then helping others in theirs, and just the kind of unfolding of a business from a product. That in and of itself is such a creative journey. I'm curious, for you, at what point did you recognize, oh, this is a business, and
hmm
now what do I do with it?
Yeah. It took probably 2 or 3 years of it knocking on my head to finally wake me up to that fact. I was just in this lane where I thought I had written a book. I was a therapist in the office and I wrote
Mm-hmm.
a book. And it kept kind of having these recurring entrees with people. I was being
Mm-hmm.
contacted by different people in the media, and I would appear on a TV show and not think anything about that, or on a radio show, or be interviewed for a magazine. I didn't think anything about it, and it kept building. I kept hearing from readers. And so there were opportunities that I missed because it took those 2 to 3 years for me to go, oh, wait, this actually is a little bigger than I had given it credit. So the stubborn person I am, unfortunately, took 2 or 3 years.
In the grand scheme of life, that's not very long. So, but
Since it came out in 99, there's been a lot of years since
yeah,
then, right?
sure, totally. Well, in the theme of creativity, I'm curious, what does it mean to you to be creative?
Yeah, so one of my creativity is really about seeing patterns, and so one of the things I do really well is identify frameworks. I create frameworks to help people remember. My whole thing is how can I best deliver information to somebody? and frameworking for me is like my, I don't know, sculptures. I, I work in these frameworks that my wife, I'll tell her another one. She's like, well, there you go again with, running on it. And so frameworks. And the interesting thing is that's not just in my own work. I've spent time with authors. I don't know how many times I've been interviewing them or just chatting with them, and I point something out, and they're like, "Well, I've never thought of it that way," but that's exactly what I do. So the
Mm.
frameworking thing seems to be, I don't know, my little skill set.
Your superpower.
Well, yeah, I mean, I remember, and my wife reminded me of this years ago. She said you did that even when you were a grad student, where the professors would send me students who couldn't figure out what to do with their dissertation or their thesis, and
Oh,
go
wow.
get them to put that into place. And I was like, okay, I'll chat with them. And so I didn't identify it back then just because, I mean, that's the thing about creativity, right? It sometimes is invisible to the person who's being the creative.
So
And
true.
and then somebody points it out and you go, oh, that is what I do. So
Hmm.
the frameworking is a big piece of it. I think the other piece is that people have told me repeatedly that my writing style is very conversational, and I do that intentionally to
Hmm.
try to be having an easy conversation for people to make ideas as simple as possible and still have it hold on to the power of it.
Yeah. For individuals who are hearing you say framework, would you mind explaining a little bit about what you are talking about?
Yeah. And it's kind of funny because I just had a conversation last week with a podcast person who said, well, I don't believe in processes.
Oh.
And behind her was three framed pieces that were basically how she does her coaching. And I went, tell me about what's on the wall behind you, right? So the frameworks are that if I were to sit down with somebody and say, give me a however many points you need of how you do something,
Mm,
that would be the framework. So
mhm,
how do you work with somebody if you're a therapist or a coach or a consultant? What do you do?
mhm,
And we all have that fingerprint or a thumbprint of how we do that. And that would be the framework. So a four-step process would be one. I have, for instance, I created a pivot framework for people to move
mm,
from their reaction to their what they want to be in their values. That pivot stands for something, PIVOT. Each stands for
mhm,
something. That's the framework for that. But
mm,
I I think we all have them.
mhm.
They just act sometimes invisibly behind us. So,
Sure.
I mean, even as I'll say to somebody, they're like, "Well, I don't have any frameworks or systems," is another way of
Mhm,
saying it. I'm like, "Tell me about your morning," and they'll tell me about it, and I'm like,
mm.
there's your framework for how you do your morning, right?" So
Yeah.
they exist behind us, even if we don't notice them.
Yeah. Thanks for breaking that down. I think sometimes we hear words that we have some connection to, but the actual pieces that create it or translate that into our own life can
Mm.
be a little elusive at
Yeah.
times. So I appreciate
So,
that.
just to frame it a little bit further, my belief is that well-written books hold a framework, a single
Mm,
framework in it really
mhm,
well. The ones that you read and you're like, I don't know where this is going, they didn't get their framework down. Or
ah,
when there are, you're looking at it and you're like, I can't do all 25 things they said. They had multiple frameworks that were there that were too many. So
mm,
frameworks give us a clear definition of what we're trying to express.
mm. Yeah, when I'm kind of translating this into more creativity language, it's the structure and
Mm,
some boundaries that we then get to play with in
yeah.
inside of the framework, so to
Yeah.
speak.
And the
Yeah,
boundaries are important because it narrows down
absolutely.
what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And when I talk with an author and I'm like, who's this book for? And they're like, everyone, then nobody. That
Right.
is the answer, right?
Sure.
But if I can narrow it down to a specific group, the more narrow it is, the more powerful
Mm,
that framework becomes.
hmm. It's so true. Working with coaches and authors, I can only imagine the challenges that they come up against or you come up against in working with them. What are some of those challenges that you see time and time again, and how do you navigate that with them?
Yeah, so we just kind of pointed at one of them, that their framework is not clear to them.
Yeah.
That's a big piece. And so finding a way to clarify a framework is important. Narrowing
Mhm.
down what that framework looks like, that's important. I think the other one is them being able to let the book be the tool, not the end, but letting the book be the
Mm.
tool. The
Hmm.
problem is, I think a lot of times, and I mean, it's your baby. They're
Yeah.
sitting right beside me. They're my babies, each one. And so you don't want to spoil that, and you hold on to that. And I'm like, that baby is just the tool. It's not the baby. It's the tool.
Hmm.
So don't be too bound by it and let it begin to
Mm.
breathe a little bit into the world. Um, Most of the time when an author figures out the business to come from the book, it's because they've been willing to listen to what comes back to them.
Mm.
So sometimes authors react to, when I say criticism, I don't mean just negative criticism, just criticism, period. People
Yeah.
critiquing their book, they have a hard time listening to that,
Hmm.
and because it feels so personal. And
Sure.
part of what I would say is, several of my books come because somebody said, "I wish this book had," and I went, tell me what you
Mm.
wish that book had done, because that's the next one. And no book is complete on anything. There's always something that can go beyond that book. So
Yeah.
allowing there to be space for the next piece is important. Many
Mhm.
times that it feels too personal for authors, so not being so personal is important.
How do you do that? That's like the big question, right?
Yeah.
We hear, don't take it personally, and yet that process is really challenging.
Yeah. Yeah. And anybody in the creative world feels that.
Yeah.
And yet all of us talk about these other pieces. You might think nothing of saying, I don't like the way that person sings, but if that person heard you say that, it would feel very
Right.
personal.
Yeah.
And so a piece of it is going, that's their opinion. That doesn't mean it's
Mm.
fact. So starting off with opinion versus the fact.
Yeah.
Second, being willing to be open to that as feedback. I have some coaches that work in my program, and one of them I heard from a client who gave some rather harsh feedback, and so I said, we need to talk about this. So I passed it on, and I saw the first thing was an ego bruise. And
Mm.
then she came back and she said, I've been thinking about it, and I realized that is free coaching. I didn't have to pay for that feedback. It's free coaching. And so
Mm.
because of that, I can take in, what can I learn from this, and what do I need to discard from this?
Mm-hmm.
And so then you start breaking down, what you're hearing into what's useful, what's not useful.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is a good way of stepping away from the emotionality of it into
Mm-hmm.
looking at it from, what can I learn from this information? Every critique is information. I was about to say just information, but it is information. It can
Yeah.
feel like it's overwhelming, but it is information that we can then take and say, what do we do with this?
Sure. It's that, yeah, like you were saying, that separation between opinion, fact, or emotion
Mm,
and everything else.
yeah.
That, yeah.
And I remind myself, I mean, just anybody who's on social media knows that people can exhibit a side of themselves that they would not in normal life. And to take that
Yeah.
into consideration, that I am on the receiving end of what is out in the world all the time. And I've got to decide how much am I going to absorb of that, and how much am
Hmm.
I going to go Taylor Swift, shake it off.
It's so true. So true. Well, having gone from the world of therapy to the world of coaching and writing and authorship, w- what's your earliest memory of being creative?
Okay, so the dirty secret about me writing books is I'm dyslexic. And I still don't read books for joy. I
Okay.
read books for information. I watch my wife and my daughter read novels. I don't read novels. I will listen to novels because I like
Mm.
the creativity,
Hmm.
but I don't read them with any joy. And so it was not in writing. So the other dirty little secret is, when I was a teenager, my expression of my creativity was I was a magician. And so I got to be creative by performing.
Yeah.
That was the fun of creating wonder for people was kind of what floated my boat when I mean, I started when I was 12.
Wow.
Before that, so dyslexia means that my skills of writing, well, I always got critiqued for bad writing. So I also downplayed my capacity of sketching or painting or anything else. But I
Mm,
did have a lot of outlets when I was younger of doing sculptures, and
hmm.
my mother put me into a pottery class where I got to see how little I could do on the wheel. But I remember enjoying trying the process.
Sure.
I think a lot of my creativity has always been around curiosity, just like what I wonder
Mm,
what I could do.
yeah. I want to talk about your teen magicianship. That sounds amazing. How did you get into that? And I love this desire of creating wonder for
Hmm.
others.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was, I probably learned more about psychology from being a magician than any graduate course helped with, of what people think and how they process.
Mhm.
But I remember as a young child loving to stop by the magic shop when we were on vacation. There
Mm.
was a magic shop, and I kept going to it, and finally started spending my vacations helping out there in the shop when I was a teenager, and buying tricks. My father also showed me a trick when I was a young child that his father had showed him. So I still own that trick. It's a three generation trick,
Yeah.
and me just being not so much about what is the puzzle of it, but the mystery of that, right? The
Mm.
wonder of, oh wow, that happened. And so when I remember one year going, I want to do magic, and going to the store and spending all of my allowances that I'd saved up on those tricks and taking them home with me and
Mm.
trying them out on people and watching the expressions. And I always had a belief as a magician that I didn't need to be doing tricks as much as letting people into the wonder of what could it be if the world were more magical.
Mm.
And so it, I always was saddened when people go, "Oh, I know how you do that. I'll figure out the
Oh,
trick behind it." And I'm like, "It's not a puzzle. It's
yeah.
entertainment." And so I always tried to do the entertainment.
Yeah. And as you were saying, learning more about people and how they
Mm.
engage as a magician more than in that psychology course in grad school. But
Yeah.
I'm curious, how does that world of wonder or that aspect, how did that kind of carry with you into your life today?
Yeah. So many tricks are way more simple than people allow themselves to think. In fact,
Hmm.
most are.
Hmm.
And I remember thinking how complicated we people are in making, and I would show this little trick, and they would have these, it was just a tiny little sleight of hand. It was a little one, and a tiny little sleight of hand. And people would say, "Oh, I know how you did that." And they would start in these explanations.
Hmm.
And it was one simple sleight of hand, one very simple sleight of hand, very basic. And they would tell me these very long explanations of the intricate engineering of this one. And I was like, why are you making this so complicated? And so years later, I read his book about how there are only so many types of magic tricks and so many ways of doing them. And I was sitting, and it's been true that I can put that up against a magic show and go, oh, you're doing this kind of trick, this kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
And how simple it is when you think of it that way, and yet how complicated people make it. And I believe
Yeah.
that is true with our lives of how there's something very simple that we need to understand and not
Hmm.
make it so complicated. Relationships, how complicated they are when they could be very much more simple. There's still
Hmm.
layers to them, but there's a simple direct link. I think that about authors when they go about the process of thinking themselves into holes. That there's, how do you write a book? You put words down on a piece of paper. I mean, that's the simple thing. How you're going to
Yeah.
do that? Lots of different ways, but that is what you're doing.
Yeah.
Um, how they think about the business that comes out of the book, how complicated sometimes they do it instead
Mm.
of what is this simple thing. And so I think probably as you're asking the question, as I ponder this, probably one of the things that I've always tried to do is take complicated things and simplify them, just like a magic trick.
Mm, I love that. And it's so needed. We do make things way more complicated than they are, or we assume they have to be complicated. It I am a therapist as
Mm.
well. And
Hmm.
so the world of relationships,
Hmm.
the amount of, yes, relationships can be complex, but that doesn't mean they are complicated.
Hmm.
And so I really appreciate the kind of teasing that apart and simplifying it. If you were to think of, creativity, and I think oftentimes people make creativity way more complicated than it actually is. For you, what is the simplified creative experience?
Yeah, in fact, I agree with you 100% that people make it more complicated than it is because I think by nature humans are creative creatures.
Yeah.
Watch kids do
Yeah.
wonders with just their thoughts and a stick, right? And or a
Yeah.
box. I mean,
Yeah.
I was with my son this past weekend. He's grown now, and my wife and I went to visit him, and he was talking about his memories of a child of what happened when a box came into our house and what he could do with the box. We are naturally creative from
Mm,
birth, and our lives are about creating. And
yeah.
I would say that of all of the differences between humans and other species, other creatures, is our creativity.
Mm,
We try to find ways of dealing with whatever in front of us. So why are we living in hostile environments? Well, we become creative about how we can do that, and then
mhm,
we act as if that's not creative. And so I just think that our human nature is in creation. So when
mm,
we're doing our life, can we be creative with it in our relationships? Can we see the creative nature of that? Of we're building a relationship, we're building
mhm,
that piece. When we look at what we are interested in, can we follow our curiosities? Because that in itself is a creative action. So
mhm.
I think it's inborn, and then we somehow act as if at some point in life we lock that away. Maybe
Yeah.
that's the child thing, and I'm like, that is a human thing. That just
Mm,
we are humanly creative in our
mhm.
everyday life if we allow that to be there.
Yeah, I so agree with all of that. And it can be very challenging
Mm.
to keep that creativity flowing while life around us is happening. Yeah.
And to
For
even see it, just to be able to spot
exactly.
and ask the question, what is creative about my life?
Mm,
And
mhm.
I remember having a conversation with the person about this, and he was like, I don't do anything creative. I'm like, nothing at all. No. Do you ever try new recipes? No.
Mhm.
Do you ever, I don't know, try new things? Well, I like to experiment with different types of coffee. That's creative.
Right.
You change how you brew them. Yes, that's creative. I mean,
Yeah.
there's we both are sitting here with
Yes.
that is creative and how you choose to do that.
Mhm.
If do you go somewhere and try a different putting something on a sandwich, that's creative. And so seeing that creativity is all around us
Mm.
begins to let us be openly creative in what we're trying.
Yeah. I'm so interested in, the trying new things because as you were talking, it had me pondering, where does that urge to try something new come from? And I'm curious if you have any thoughts about that internal impulse. Oh, I want to try this in a new way or a different thing or
Yeah. Yeah, so there's a lot of when Tony Robbins talks about the different drives of humans, the first
mm,
two of certainty and uncertainty, that we like
mhm,
both of those things. And
mhm,
so there are things that we will keep consistent, and then there are some things that we like to try something new. And to try something new is where that creativity link just kind of leaks into our life. And his thing is it doesn't take many of those six drives for something to be addictive. And I'm like, okay, so going to your favorite coffee place, you can go in and they know your name. That's the certainty piece.
Yeah.
And then you could go, oh, you know what? Today I'm going to do this. Now we've just introduced the uncertainty piece,
Mm.
much less the caffeine piece, but just these other
Sure.
pieces. And so we feel like we belong there when they call us by our name. We know what
Mm.
it's going to be like. We've already hit three of those just
Hmm.
immediately. So um, that need we all have of trying something a little different at the same time of wanting to be able to do what we expect means that we are constantly able to interject these little pieces of creativity around us.
Mm-hmm.
We just don't recognize that unless now we're pointing it out, and
Sure.
so there it is. That piece is because we have a human need for something new, even while we have the human need for something the same.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I read a book called The Creativity Curve where they really talk about that. You want something that is familiar enough
Mm.
that people recognize it and just new or interesting enough that people want to know more.
Yeah.
So
That
that's
novelty gives us the little dopamine hit
yes,
that, yeah.
absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Well, this has been such a wonderful chat. I have one last question for you.
Sure.
What does it feel like in your body to be creative?
Energizing.
Mm,
So I feel like I'm creating stuff. I've got multiple podcasts that I host, and then I'm working on different projects, and I can always tell when I'm kind of in that zone because it feels energizing. And so energized is even if it's tiring, and all of these things are, and
mhm,
you go, okay, but there's the energizing piece that
mhm.
is kind of the payoff.
Absolutely. I love that. Well, thank you, Lee, so much for taking the time to chat with me. If people want to learn about the work you do, your books that you have out in the world, how could they go about doing that?
Yeah, so a lot of the work I'm doing with authors, if that's like in the world of writing, book to business blueprint.com is the great place for that. Book to business blueprint.com. In terms of my books, you can find them at savethemarriage.com/books, BOOKS. So savethemarriage.com/books. That'll get you on the page for that.
Perfect. Well, I will put links in show notes so people have easy access. And thank you again for taking the time to chat with me. I have
Thank you.
thoroughly enjoyed our
That was fun.
conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Sustaining Creativity Podcast. We'd love to keep in touch, so follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We are at Sustaining Creativity. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Tag your friends and family so they can listen too. We love to hear from you, so leave your reviews, comments, and questions. Check out our website, sustainingcreativity.com, for upcoming offerings and creativity coaching. Tune in Tuesdays for our next episode. And remember, with creativity, anything's possible.